The global energy transition is often described as a choice between growth and the environment. Capital is the biggest hurdle in the green energy transition, specifically getting into the place that needs it the most. My guest in this episode, Mr. Woochong Um, CEO of Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, is known as a master of concessional finance, using philanthropic and public funds to unlock billions in private investment for emerging markets. From scaling battery storages to retiring coal plants, he's at the front line of the most complex energy market. The Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet is a collaborative initiative to accelerate the transition to renewable energy in emerging and developing economies. It functions as an alliance between philanthropic organizations, governments, and private sector partners to address the dual challenges of energy poverty and climate change. Welcome, Mr. Wuchon.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Energy security, trade wars, and global debt are reshaping the mission to end energy poverty. Have the recent geopolitical developments changed the conversation about moving away from fossil fuels?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm really glad to be here. And before I start my response, I've been in the development business for the last 31 years. It's very important to keep in mind that the development, climate change, energy transitions are all integrated with each other. So we have to make sure that these are handled effectively well. And at the end of the day, whatever we do, we have to make sure that economic development drives the growth, which will help alleviate poverty. And in that sense, the energy access is really, really important. So when you have countries which are still developing, they'll find a way to get access to electricity and energy that's sustainable and affordable. And in this current situation, it is putting a lot of pressure on people in terms of cost rise and things just becoming more expensive, especially in the short term. So it's making it really real for people how not having sustainable, smooth flow of energy into their countries will be devastating to the country's growth. So, in a way, this current situation is very challenging for people in the short term, but it's giving this energy transition to clean energy is getting quite a bit of tailwind, helping countries realize that the sooner you get away from dependency on fossil fuel, the better for their long-term sustainability.
So now today, everyone is talking about the Trump effect on financing. If anyone who talk to any industry, that's one thing which is being spoken about. How resilient is the Global Energy Alliance funding model?
Yeah, let me step back a little bit in answering that to explain why we exist. Energy has been worked on for many years, over 3 decades plus. And the first 20 years, 2 decades of those 30 years has been quite successful in terms of addressing people who do not have electricity. So back then it was like 1.5 billion people. And with the existing partners, development banks, the DFIs and private sector and so forth, have been doing the job really well. And that number got reduced about half, about 700 million people within the first 2 decades. But unfortunately, in the last 10 years, the number got stuck at 700, and it's very hard to bring it down. And of which about 600 million people are in the African region. So, one would have to look at why is that happening? I mean, there are multiple reasons why. First, obviously, there's a population growth. So there's an upward pressure in terms of number of people out there. But more importantly, what's happening is the last mile, this group of people who still do not have electricity, are harder to get to, which means they're in remote areas, they're in areas which have higher risk in terms of investment, where the new technologies need to be deployed. So the financing is not going to these places where they need to be. So 5 years ago, when Global Energy Alliance was created, people realized that doing the same thing over and over again, no matter how much money we have from the DFIs and MDBs, it's not going to address the last mile. So then it was very importantly realized that what is the new model that we need to work on? So we realized that we need to have a better partnership across public, private, and philanthropic partnership, where philanthropies don't have as much money as the other first two in terms of volume. But the philanthropic capital and knowledge is very powerful because philanthropies do have much higher appetite for risk and trying to do something more innovative. And therefore, if you can mobilize public, private, and philanthropic partnership, then philanthropies can help develop projects, do the de-risking products out in the places where the funding needs to go, and in a way act like a tugboat that can help the big tanker with lots of money, like the DFIs and MDBs, to be able to go to places where they could not go before. Sorry. So now in doing so, one challenge is that philanthropies have to come together, because there's, just like everywhere else, even within the philanthropies, there's quite a bit of fragmentation in terms of different philanthropic entities wanting to do their own thing. But this current situation with the U.S. Government cutting the funding from the USAID, and for example, there is a much stronger realization that the philanthropies need to work together more, right? So, it's actually, again, giving us the tailwind in terms of having a dialogue with the philanthropies to aggregate their efforts so that they can be part of a much bigger global agenda, like energy transition, leading to better management of climate change. And that's still very much work in progress. And that's why we are here to do what we need to do. So in a way, just like the current conflict, that's giving us tailwind to help the countries realize that the faster they can kind of decarbonize is the better for their long-term security. And also the current situation in this continent is helping for us to better articulate and convince the partners out there that we need to work together closer and faster.
Glad you elaborated on the entire process. When we talk financing and funding, you're looking at just one aspect, one category of people who are going to do that. So I'm glad you elaborated with for us. But there's another question which always comes in our minds, especially when we see what has been happening in the recent past, is, can energy be used as a tool for peace?
Yeah, absolutely. Because energy is a fundamental basis on which economic development can happen. And one of the sources of global conflict is poverty. When people are poor, people do some drastic things that undermines the peace across the world. So making sure that the energy is provided to the sectors that drives economic development, like the agriculture, health, education, and so forth, it will certainly add to the effort to keep the global peace. And this is one of our two pillars that we are working on. So the first pillar is, there's a very strong progress in terms of increasing the installation of new renewable energy plants. Especially in India, for example, there's over 50% of new installation is renewable. But the issue is that the grids are not equipped to handle that, right? So we are hoping that we can improve the grid utility and optimization through our program called the Grids for the Future, which make use of the battery storage and also even AI to optimize the grid operation. And in fact, there's a flagship project in the state of Rajasthan where we are demonstrating this in a grid, small part of the grid, hoping to replicate to other parts of India and also other parts of the world. So that's the grid part. The other part, other pillar is what we're calling the powering opportunity. So what's happening is that when, let's say, agriculture or health or education sector want to do something in remote places, a lot of those activities require energy. But then they kind of assume that there's electricity where they're trying to go. And when they encounter a place where there's no electricity, they go elsewhere where there is, right? So this is a gap that's also playing a role in having that 700 million people still without electricity, because there's no connectivity and the nexus between energy and the agriculture sector, for example, is being addressed. So what we're trying to do is solve a problem in a location, very much context, a location context, and see what do they need. They need the fisheries productivity by providing cold storage, but you need electricity for that. So we also bring in the energy provision solution so that they can link to storing fish catch, and then also to provide the support that's needed in terms of ensuring there's enough fish in the ocean by restoring the mangroves and such. So we're trying to create the demand for the electricity so that they can actually be productive in, at the end, increasing their economic status, which will make them basically happier so that they don't have to resort to any conflict per se.
Very rightly said so. And yes, the last mile connect is always a challenge, particularly in our country. We have seen, rural electrification has been one of the programs where the government has been focused, and a lot of work has been taken. And I would say the electricity sector in India has got its own interesting dynamic, with the center state kind of given the federal structure that we have. You have spoken about energy sovereignty. I wanted to understand from you is when you talk energy sovereignty, what do you mean by it?
Energy sovereignty, what we mean by it is that each country needs to be able to have a solution to provide sustainable and affordable energy. It does not mean that everybody should be generating their own electricity and doing their own thing. Energy sovereignty means you got to work better with your partners. With if those countries that have indigenous power source, they need to tap in. But you also need to work with the neighbors to maximize the availability of electricity. For example, if there's making use of two different peak demand period, so you can trade power so that you can actually make use of each other's excess electricity, and diversifying your energy source away from again fossil fuel, because the renewable solutions are more stable. And I often hear people saying that there's enough sunlight out there that can actually generate the entire continents, and that sun energy does not need to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So, you can actually get it right away. So the sovereignty doesn't mean everyone doing their own thing and being independent from each other, but they need to be self-sufficient by working with others.
Yes, baby steps on that is being taken. People are trying to come together, and here in this whole scenario, the bilateral relations play a much bigger role than multilateral. I can't let you go without asking this. You have been in ABB. You have had a career. You're known as, as I said in my introduction, a complete finance person. So, how from there to here, do you see any shift, any change when green energy projects come forward in among the financial institutions in their approach for green energy projects?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been in ADB for 31 years, so I've seen a lot of things, and there are multiple points that we can discuss on the, for the long-term sustainability. As you're right, there's bilateral relationship, but then there's a broader multilateral framework that people need to work on it, because it's easier to establish bilateral relationship when there's a working multilateral system. And I remember going back, I guess around 20 years when, Laos, had a hydropower resource, which they were willing to provide electricity to Thailand through the proper power purchase agreement. And this was a win-win solution because, Laos had the resource and Thailand needed electricity so that they can actually go away from coal. Now that took a long time to get started because there's a lot of negotiation that needs to happen bilaterally and multilaterally as well. Now back then, I don't remember encountering any of the philanthropies in that conversation. But 20 years passed, things are getting more complicated and also sophisticated, right? The philanthropies are also evolving into entities that are more willing to be part of the bigger global agenda, not just a small, let's say, food truck to provide food for somebody, which is also important. But there's such an opportunity now to make use of the philanthropic innovation and risk-taking approach to be able to unlock financing for some of the new types of technology and in the frontier regions as well. So the thing that I mentioned about the pilot that we're doing in the state of Rajasthan, India provides a perfect platform to test out new things because of the capacity of the people, high capacity of people in India. So in that conversation, for us to be able to demonstrate a winning proposal that's fundable will reduce the financial risk, especially the perceived risk, because, as you heard from many publications, that cost of financing is much higher in the developing countries. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that there is a huge perception issue, right? So by us taking the risk on a viable investment, that we can actually demonstrate that, hey, the risk, what you think is a risk, is not as big as you might think. So that would hopefully trigger the avalanche of investments coming into the places like India and other places, and so that they can actually address the issue of closing that gap of 700 million people still not having electricity.
How close or how far are we with the whole issue of energy poverty, doing away with energy poverty?
This is one of those things where we are hopeful and we have the target to address reducing the number of people without electricity. For example, we have this program that we're working with the World Bank and African Development Bank in the whole continent of Africa called the Mission 300. It's called Mission 300 because we want to electrify 300 million people in Africa by 2030. That's half of the people who don't have electricity. Hopefully we can do similar things in other places too. So, we have big ambitions, but it's hard to tell when we'll achieve that. I see this as a race between time and technology development. We've seen some miracles that human beings have achieved. What is the significance of 2007? That's the introduction of iPhone. And remember, maybe you're not as for someone
Very
like
much there, very much there.
Yeah. So the life before 2007 and life after 2007 are incredibly different, and we could not even imagine what the life was going to be, right? Before pre-2007, with Uber and all the stuff that we do now as a normal thing. And then now you have AI starting from 2023 onwards, and now it's everywhere. So I'm thinking, what we imagine what the world will be and how far we can address the energy poverty. If you think in today's terms, that will be very limited. So we have to imagine the best case scenario and pursue it and see how fast we can go there. And really making the use of innovation and technology is really crucial, especially AI. So the work we're doing in Rajasthan, please do keep an eye on that one, because I think that could really transform the way we move the energy transition agenda forward for everybody on the planet.
To sum up our conversation, I would say that yes, energy can be used as a tool for peace, and yes, energy sovereignty, it could be a way to end energy poverty. I mean, if we all start working together, not only bilaterally but multilaterally as well, and find solutions. So there is a way. It depends on how patient we are and how well we can reach out to achieve our target or our goal. So thank you so much for sparing this time with us, and we will definitely watch out for the project in Rajasthan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This is all we have in this episode of Energonomics. Thank you. For the first time listeners, Energonomics is a podcast and video series which focuses on decoding the complexities of the energy sector. We try to examine how geopolitics, government policies, and economic shifts impact energy prices and security. Through the episode, we try to dissect and demystify the issues which have a direct impact on you and I.